I looked at the check for $15 million and immediately decided two things. No one could ever know I won, and the only man who could help me handle it was Theron Vance. My palms were sweating against the glossy paper, the kind of cold sweat that screams panic, not excitement. Theron was not just my best friend Juniper's father, he was a titan in private equity, the kind of powerful, reserved man who rarely saw me as anything more than a shadow in his grand foyer. But he also held secrets better than anyone I knew. Dialing his direct line felt like stepping off a cliff. My throat tightened when his crisp, deep voice answered. Vance. My name is Willow Hayes, and until 2 days ago, my biggest financial challenge was making sure my rent check cleared before I bought groceries. Life was a loop of predictable, low-stakes existence. I worked as a graphic designer for a mid-sized marketing firm downtown, a job that was respectable, demanded precision, and required zero emotional investment. I excelled at being functional. I was the one who remembered everyone's obscure allergies during office luncheons, the one who fixed the printer, the one who was never late, and the one whose desk sat perpetually clean, devoid of any personal clutter that might invite conversation. I was efficient, dependable, and utterly invisible. My evenings were equally structured. After the commute back to my small, meticulously organized apartment, I would make a simple dinner, usually pasta or a complex salad I didn't truly enjoy but made because it felt responsible, and watch old documentaries. Juniper, my best friend since second grade, often called, but tonight I avoided her call. Juniper and I were inseparable emotionally, but socially we lived on opposite sides of a vast economic chasm. She lived in a sprawling estate in Greenwich with her father, Theron Vance, and I lived in a third-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that was definitely up and coming, but hadn't quite arrived. I carried my normalcy like a shield. It was easier not to expect anything grand. I'd learned early on that when you were quiet, competent, and didn't make waves, you avoided disappointment. I didn't crave drama. I simply yearned for stability, a solid ground under my feet. The lottery ticket had been a fluke, bought on a whim during a particularly dull lunch break, tucked into my worn wallet, and completely forgotten until I saw the winning numbers flashing on the news ticker while waiting for my coffee to brew. Now, sitting on my sofa, the check tucked into a copy of Moby Dick for safekeeping, the quiet predictability of my life felt like a costume I could no longer wear. The $15 million was a bomb waiting to go off. I wasn't excited. I was terrified. Money like that didn't bring freedom. It brought scrutiny, vultures, and the destruction of the functional invisibility I had so carefully cultivated. And that brought me back to Theron Vance. I knew Theron didn't like me. Not in a hostile way, but in a neutral. I acknowledge your existence as Juniper's friend kind of way. He was 52, impeccably tailored, with the sort of presence that could silence a crowded room just by entering it. He was a man defined by control. The one time I'd interacted with him outside of a holiday setting was when I'd briefly interned at a smaller firm that handled some of his ancillary philanthropic projects. I had been terrified then, too. He was intimidating because he was smart, not because he was cruel. He was a safe harbor only if you needed absolute, ruthless discretion. And right now, discretion was my only currency. I desperately needed someone to make this massive, world-breaking windfall look small and mundane. Someone who dealt in numbers so large that 15 million was just a Tuesday. And that man was definitely not going to answer my call. The next morning, the anxiety was a cold, constant hum in my chest. I couldn't concentrate on redesigning the firm's landing page. The check for $15 million felt like a spotlight on my soul. I needed to act, but every path felt risky. Then, the universe offered a tiny, accidental window. Juniper called, sounding frantic. "Willow, you won't believe this. I'm stuck. My flight got delayed until tomorrow. And Dad is supposed to host the Sterling Foundation dinner tonight. The caterers are setting up, but the guest list spreadsheet is corrupted, and he's stuck in back-to-back meetings until 6 p.m. He needs someone reliable to manage the door, just cross-checking names. Can you, please?" My immediate thought was a firm, resounding no. Stepping into Theron Vance's world, even for a 5-hour administrative task, felt dangerously close to the source of my current panic. I usually avoided his house like it was contaminated with high expectations. But Juniper was genuinely distressed, and I hated saying no to her. "It's just checking names, Willow," she pleaded. "You're a designer, you're detail-oriented. You won't even see him, probably. He'll be schmoozing." I sighed, staring at the lottery ticket hidden under my tea coaster. The irony was suffocating. I needed his help, and now I had a legitimate, innocuous reason to be on his property. It wasn't destiny. It was a corrupted spreadsheet and a delayed regional flight. Pure circumstance. "Okay, Juness, send me the file and the dress code. I'll go." I left work early, fabricating a dentist appointment. I drove the 40 minutes to Greenwich, the neighborhood of sprawling, manicured lawns and silent wealth. Juniper's house, Theron's house, was a monument of modern architecture, all dark slate and glass, sitting discreetly behind automated gates. I felt ridiculous walking up the driveway in my sensible black slacks and a borrowed silk blouse. When I arrived, the house was a controlled chaos of catering staff and floral arrangements. I was directed to a small private office adjacent to the main ballroom where the guest list had been printed. I sat down at a mahogany desk that probably cost more than my entire apartment building, feeling like a highly competent imposter. I was just here to check names, nothing more. This brief, necessary invasion into his territory felt like the least aggressive way to eventually approach him. I was establishing accidental proximity, a neutral territory, purely by being Juniper's favor-doer. I concentrated on the task, trying to ignore the scent of expensive sandalwood and the low thrum of classical music being tested in the Great Hall. I just needed to survive the next 5 hours, cross names off a list, and leave. I certainly didn't expect to see him until the guests arrived, and even then, he'd only be a distant, powerful blur. The silence of the private office was only broken by the soft scratching of my pen against the high-quality cardstock. I was comparing the digital roster to the printed seating chart, a tedious but necessary task. It was about 5:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the expected arrival of the foundation guests, when the door opened without a knock. Theron Vance walked in. He didn't make an entrance, precisely, but his presence filled the room instantly, displacing the air. He was wearing a dark, tailored suit, not just expensive, but perfectly fitted, like armor crafted for a king. He wasn't loud or flashy, he was simply composed. Every line in his posture spoke of extreme control and deep, focused concentration. He wasn't overtly handsome in a movie star way, but his intensity, the sharp intelligence in his steel-gray eyes, the deep lines etched near his mouth, made him utterly compelling. He stopped just inside the threshold, holding a leather briefcase. His eyes, usually cool and appraising, registered my presence with a flicker of mild surprise, quickly masked. He looked exhausted, too. Beneath the veneer of success, I could see the fatigue of a man who carried enormous responsibility. His shoulders seemed slightly weighted, and the knot in his tie looked a little too tight, almost restricting his breathing. "Miss Hayes," he stated, his voice the low, resonant baritone that always commanded attention. It wasn't a question, just a factual acknowledgement. "Mr. Vance," I replied, standing quickly, feeling about 3 feet tall and distinctly out of place. I clutched the laminated guest list like a lifeline. Juniper asked me to step in. She was detained. "Yes," I gathered. "She texted me," he said, setting his briefcase on the floor with a soft thud. He ran a hand over the back of his neck, a small, weary gesture that contradicted his powerful image. "I appreciate you doing this, Willow." He used my first name, not casually, but with a careful, precise tone, as if confirming the correct nomenclature. "It was no problem," I'm almost done confirming the table numbers. I tried to sound purely professional, the competent shadow he expected me to be. He leaned against the desk, close enough that I could smell the subtle, clean scent of his cologne, a mix of cedar and something impossibly fresh. He watched me sort the papers, his gaze heavy and unwavering. It wasn't predatory, it was just analytical. He was assessing me as a system, a tool. I desperately tried to maintain my composure, focusing on the paper in my hands. Theron Vance didn't belong in my orbit. He was a universe away, dealing with global markets and billion-dollar decisions, while I was dealing with corrupted spreadsheets and a lottery ticket that threatened to expose my entire quiet life. His proximity was already destabilizing. "You always prioritize efficiency, don't you, Miss Hayes?" he observed, his expression unreadable. "It makes things less complicated, sir," I managed, my voice sounding steadier than my hammering heart. I was acutely aware that this was the most time he had ever spent looking directly at me, and I was holding my breath, waiting for him to move on. "Less complicated," he repeated, the phrase hanging in the air. He didn't elaborate, just continued to study me. The silence stretched, and the frantic bustle of the caterers outside seemed miles away. I felt the familiar heat rise in my cheeks. Was my hair messy? Was the blouse too tight? I hated this feeling of being microscopically examined. "Is there anything else I can organize before the guests arrive, Mr. Vance?" I asked, trying to break the heavy quiet with professional formality. He pushed off the desk, taking a slow step toward the window, looking out at the twilight descending over his impeccable grounds. "No. Juniper told me you were handling everything flawlessly." He paused, turning his head just slightly to catch my eye. "Why did you never pursue a position in finance, Willow? You have the temperament for it, the discipline." The question startled me. It was too personal for a transactional moment. "I prefer design, sir. It allows for a different kind of structure." "Structure that you control," he supplied, his eyes narrowed slightly. "Not in judgment, but observation. That's important to you. Control." I swallowed, the tightness in my throat returning. It felt like he was reading the ledger of my life, the deliberate choices I'd made to stay safe and small. I was afraid to agree, afraid to disagree. "I suppose, like everyone, I value stability." "Stability is an illusion, Miss Hayes," he countered immediately, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate and less like a CEO addressing an assistant. "It's a concept we cling to when we're afraid of the real chaos that underpins everything." I frowned, instinctively pulling back. Was he talking about market volatility, or something else entirely? His gaze was intense, far too intense for a conversation about corporate structure. I began to wonder if I was entirely misinterpreting his mood. Perhaps the stress of the event had made him philosophical. Maybe he just hadn't eaten lunch. He noticed my discomfort. A small, almost imperceptible shift in the corner of his mouth softened his expression fractionally. "Forgive me, Willow. A difficult day of negotiations." He sighed, the sound barely audible. "I appreciate your discretion in stepping in. You are dependable." Dependable. That was my highest compliment, my defining characteristic. But the word sounded empty when he said it. I nodded, arranging the papers again, trying to regain my functional invisibility. I needed to pivot this conversation back to the guest list, back to the safe, quantifiable world of logistics. But then he did it again. He held my gaze for too long, just a beat past the point of politeness, making the air crackle with something I couldn't name, something that felt dangerously close to mutual recognition. It was a silent acknowledgement that we were two real people in this room, not just a CEO and his daughter's friend, and the thought made my hands tremble. I looked down, desperate to hide the sudden, irrational hope that he wasn't just tired, but genuinely curious about the woman standing across from him. The small clock on the desk chimed 6:00 p.m., signaling the imminent arrival of the Foundation board members. Theron didn't move toward the door. Instead, he took another slow step back toward the center of the room, loosening his tie with a precise, almost violent movement. The perfect suit suddenly seemed less like armor and more like a constraint. "I hate these events," he confessed, his voice low enough that it barely reached me. It wasn't a complaint. It was a simple statement of fact, stripped of any pretense. I blinked, surprised by the honesty. "They seem necessary, sir." He offered a humorless smile. "Necessary evils. Everyone here tonight wants something. They want access, they want influence, they want affirmation of their own success. They look at me, and they see the portfolio, the net worth, the perceived invincibility. No one sees the man who hasn't had a quiet moment to himself in 3 weeks." He rubbed his temples, a deep furrow in his brow. "I spend my life managing expectations, Willow. Everyone expects me to be the pillar, to never falter, never doubt." It was the most vulnerable thing I had ever heard him say. It shattered the polished image I held of him. I suddenly saw the weight he carried. This was not the intimidating titan of finance. This was a man weary of the relentless performance. I understand, Mr. Vance," I said quietly. I truly did. My whole life was built on managing the expectation of being dependable and quiet, on never requiring anything from anyone. He looked at me sharply, his gray eyes piercing. "No, I don't think you do. You manage expectations to protect yourself. I manage them to protect empires. It's a different scale of solitude." He paused, then softened the statement. "But perhaps the root is the same, the loneliness of being misunderstood. Or perhaps simply the loneliness of being seen, only for the role you play, and never for the person inside the costume." He stepped closer to the desk, his hand resting near the stack of finalized name cards. His proximity was dizzying. "Juniper is wonderful, but she lives in the future. She's ambitious and loud and knows exactly what she wants. You, Willow, you are quiet, meticulous, and seem to exist completely outside the fray. I find that—" He paused, searching for the right word. "Remarkable. You're the only person I've seen this week who wasn't trying to impress me." My heart hammered against my ribs. I felt completely exposed, yet validated in a way I hadn't realized I craved. He hadn't noticed my quietness. He had noticed my deliberate choice to be quiet. The fact that he saw me as a person making a choice, not just a bystander, was a profound shift. The power dynamic hadn't flipped socially, but emotionally, he had just ceded significant ground. He was asking for understanding, not professional service. He was revealing his core isolation. A chime from the security system announced the first guest. Theron immediately straightened, the armor snapping back into place. "The show is about to begin," he murmured, the exhaustion temporarily banished behind his CEO mask. "I should take my place by the door," I said, picking up the list. "Wait," he said. He didn't touch me, but the single word stopped me cold. He walked over to a small, antique bar cabinet. I hadn't noticed and poured himself a glass of water, offering me the bottle without asking. It was a gesture of simple, shared humanity. "You need to eat before you stand there for hours. The staff usually grabs something quick in the main kitchen before service." We walked side by side down the long, silent corridor towards the immense professional kitchen. The noise here was louder, clattering and controlled. In a small stainless steel corner designated for staff breaks, a sandwich platter sat untouched. We didn't exchange pleasantries with the catering staff. They merely nodded respectfully to him and avoided eye contact. We stood facing each other across a small, clean island, eating slightly dry turkey sandwiches. It was absurd. Theron Vance. The man who shaped continents of wealth, sharing a hurried, unglamorous meal with me, the invisible graphic designer, in a brightly lit industrial kitchen 15 minutes before hosting a major foundation event. The silence was profound, but not awkward. It was comfortable, the kind of quiet that suggests a mutual understanding of pressure and the necessity of pausing. He took a long drink of water, watching me. "What do you do when you need to switch off, Willow?" he asked, finally breaking the quiet. "I read, or I organize my space," I replied, genuinely. Physical order usually helps calm mental chaos. A rare, true smile touched his lips, a fleeting, attractive curve that softened the sharp angles of his face. Mental chaos. I know that space well. I organize countries on paper, but I can't seem to organize my time off. He leaned slightly on the island. "Do you ever just wish for a reset button? A chance to make one crucial decision differently?" I looked down at the sandwich in my hand. He was talking about his life, his pressures, but the question landed directly on the $15 million secret in my apartment. My need to talk to him was suddenly visceral, but this wasn't the moment. I just nodded slowly. "Yes, sir. Often." We ate in silence for another minute, the shared routine normalizing the profound connection blooming between us. We were two isolated islands recognizing each other across a turbulent sea, united by a simple shared meal and the mutual recognition of a deep, exhausting solitude. It wasn't love. It wasn't desire. It was a sudden, clear truth. And it felt stronger than any declaration of intent. I knew, with an absolute certainty, that this man understood the cost of a controlled life. We finished the sandwiches, and the moment of shared quiet was over. Theron checked his cufflink, a subconscious move to reassert control. "Thank you for the company, Willow. Now, let's get this evening underway." I followed him back toward the front hall. As we walked, the weight of the lottery check settled heavily back onto my shoulders, amplified by the connection we had just forged. This was wrong. I was crossing lines I couldn't afford to cross. Theron Vance was my best friend's father, a man I respected professionally and now saw intimately, yet he remained untouchably powerful. If I told him about the money now, I would be leveraging the emotional vulnerability he'd just shown. It would be manipulative, even if my need for his specific expertise was genuine. And if I didn't tell him, if I tried to navigate this sudden, immense wealth alone, I risked public exposure, financial ruin, and the loss of the quiet life I held so dear. The moral conflict was stark. The $15 million was an abstract problem. Theron was a concrete, breathing complication. Our sudden intimacy, catalyzed by dry turkey and shared fatigue, was the real danger. It made my professional request for help feel tainted, personal. I needed to pull back. I needed to be Willow Hayes, the efficient anonymous logistics coordinator for the evening. I needed to put distance between us before I ruined the simple, precious thing that was my friendship with Juniper, or worse, damaged his professional standing by revealing my absurd secret in the context of this newfound emotional proximity. "Mr. Vance," I began, my voice deliberately flat. "Once the guests are settled, I'll wait until the speeches begin, and then I'll leave. Please just text Juniper that the lists were accurate." I was creating my exit strategy, reinforcing the boundary. He stopped just before the main double doors, the sound of the first group of guests greeting the staff filtering through. He turned, his gaze catching mine, and he seemed to sense my sudden retraction, the wall I was desperately trying to rebuild between us. "Running away already? Willow?" he asked, the question light but pointed. "I was only supposed to be temporary help, sir," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the lapel of his perfect suit, avoiding the intensity of his eyes. "My role is done." He didn't challenge my logic. He just held the silence, a profound understanding passing between us. He knew I was retreating, and I had the terrifying realization that he didn't want me to. I gripped the guest list, bracing myself. I had to maintain this distance. I had too much to lose. My self-respect, my best friend, and the secret that could change everything. The tension was suffocating. I needed to ask him, but if I did, it had to be professional, cold, and calculated, erasing the memory of the shared, quiet vulnerability we'd just experienced. I was about to step past him when he reached out, not to stop me physically, but to place his hand lightly on the doorframe, effectively boxing me in for a moment. His eyes were no longer analytical or weary. They were focused, radiating a fierce conviction. "Stop running, Willow," he said, the urgency in his voice startling. It wasn't the CEO demanding compliance. It was the vulnerable man demanding truth. My breath hitched. "Mr. Vance, I really need to—" "You need to breathe," he cut in softly. "And you need to tell me what's actually happening. You've been radiating panic since you walked into this house. It's not the guest list. You're too competent for that." I felt the $15 million screaming inside my head. The moment was now or never. I couldn't retreat. He had cornered me with understanding. I took a shaky breath, my carefully constructed facade crumbling. "I came here tonight because I need your help, sir. Desperately." This was the only way I could think to establish a professional pretext without raising alarm bells. Theron leaned in slightly, his expression changing from intense focus to something akin to profound curiosity. "Help with what, Willow? You need a loan, something legal, just name it." I couldn't meet his eyes, focusing instead on the pristine white collar of his shirt. I needed to say it, quickly, before the shame consumed me. "It's about money. A large, completely unmanageable sum of money. I won the lottery this week. $15 million, tax-free. And I told no one." The silence that followed was deafening, the background noise of arriving guests suddenly muffled. I waited for the disbelief, the judgment, the inevitable shift back to the cold, distant professionalism. Theron didn't laugh. He didn't look shocked. He simply assessed the information. And then, the crucial, devastating truth of the moment came through his voice, precise and clean. "I know you told no one, Willow. You wouldn't risk disrupting your equilibrium, even for that kind of reward," he stated, his voice quiet. He lifted his hand from the doorframe, and with devastating tenderness, he tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was fleeting, electric. "You believe I can help you manage the financial chaos, but you don't know that I also see the chaos you've always worked so hard to contain. I see the value in your silence. I see the discipline in your eyes. And I have been waiting a very long time for you to need me. Not for Juniper, not for a project, but for you. Ask me, Willow. Ask me for my help, and I will protect you from the world, and from the money." It wasn't a proposal. It was a choice, given to me by a man who saw me completely, recognizing the immense risk I had just taken by exposing my greatest vulnerability, financial chaos and emotional need, to the only person in the world powerful enough to handle both. The sheer weight of his statement, "I have been waiting a very long time for you to need me," nearly buckled my knees. My mind seized on the admission of his long-term observation, not the offer of financial aid. He hadn't just noticed my efficiency. He had cataloged my existence. The professional distance, the social disparity, the taboo proximity. All of it dissolved in the face of that overwhelming, honest recognition. My voice was a rough whisper. "I'm terrified, Mr. Vance." "I know," he responded, his eyes softening marginally, the hardness in his jaw relaxing. "It is the only sensible reaction to true change. But fear is just anticipation, Willow. You just need a strategy." "I don't know the first thing about strategy for this," I admitted, my hands finally letting go of the guest list, the papers drifting unnoticed onto the antique carpet. "I just know I can't keep living small with a fortune hidden in a book on my coffee table. He smiled, a genuine, warm expression that erased 10 years of high-pressure stress from his face. The money is the easy part. The strategy for the money is a simple matter of logistics, trusts, and discretion. We will turn it into background noise. He took a careful step back, giving me space, respecting the moment. The room was suddenly loud again with the murmur of elegant conversation from the arriving guests. The show was definitely starting, and we were still standing in the wings, suspended in our own private, catastrophic confession. "And the other part?" I asked, my gaze finally locking with his. "The waiting, the seeing me, the part that's not about the money?" Theron's gray eyes held a depth of patience I hadn't expected from a man who lived life in seconds. "That part, Willow, requires honesty and choice. I see you. I have seen you for years, observing you move through Juniper's orbit, always responsible, always withdrawing just before true engagement. You are meticulous, dedicated, and profoundly protective of your own space. I find that captivating." He leaned in again, his tone dropping. "Do you choose to keep running from me? Or do you choose to see where this unexpected truth leads?" I thought of my quiet apartment, my clean desk, my predictable life. It felt like a jail cell now, not a sanctuary. I was done being safe. I was done being invisible. I looked at this imposing man, my best friend's father, my potential financial savior, and realized the greatest risk was not accepting his offer of help, but denying the connection we shared. "I choose to see," I said, the words a solid commitment, shaking the air between us. "Theron, I need your professional guidance, yes, but I can't deny what just happened in that kitchen." He nodded, a profound sense of relief washing over his features. "Good. We start tomorrow morning, my office, and tonight, you will stand at that door, Willow, with your head held high, because you just made the hardest decision of your life, and you chose courage." Theron gave me exactly 5 seconds to internalize the decision. Then, the veneer of the high-stakes host solidified completely. He reached down, smoothly gathering the dropped guest list, handing it back to me. His fingers brushed mine, and this time, the contact was a promise, not an accident. "Go to your station, Willow. Keep your eyes on the list. No one should be able to tell that you just destabilized your entire existence and mine," he instructed, a playful challenge in his eyes. I took the list, feeling a rush of adrenaline that wasn't panic, but sheer excitement. I wasn't just checking names anymore. I was running cover for the beginning of my actual life. I walked the few feet to the large mahogany reception table near the entrance, taking my place just as the first wave of foundation donors swept in. Theron walked toward the center of the hall, immediately drawing the attention of the arriving crowd. He was flawless, greeting dignitaries with firm handshakes and genuine, practiced warmth. I watched him from my post, no longer seeing the untouchable CEO, but the man who admitted to his own solitude, the man who saw my careful control, the man who was waiting for me. The connection between us wasn't gone. It was simply submerged, running like a powerful, hidden current beneath the formal surface of the event. Every time a new group of guests distracted me, I stole a glance at Theron, and every time I found his gaze finding mine across the opulent room, it wasn't a longing look. It was a look of confirmation, a silent, shared acknowledgement of the secret we now held. The lottery win, yes, but more importantly, the fact that we had chosen each other. I stayed until the speeches began, noting that Theron never once mentioned the spreadsheet corruption or Juniper's absence. He simply moved through the event as if everything was exactly where it should be. When it was time for me to leave, I didn't announce my departure. I simply slipped out the side door, walking quickly back to my modest car. As I started the engine, my phone vibrated. It was a text from an unknown number. 8:00 a.m. My office, no pretext needed. It was signed only with a single T. I drove home, the $15 million still sitting in Moby Dick, but the weight was gone. The money was still a problem, but it was our problem now. I had asked the most powerful, controlled man I knew for help, and in return, he had given me the one thing I never expected: genuine recognition. This wasn't an ending. It was the moment the door finally opened. What do you do when the man who knows your deepest secret is also the man who sees your true self? If you loved the tension and unexpected vulnerability in Willow and Theron's story, make sure you don't miss out on what happens next. Hit the like button, subscribe for more confessionals that hit too close to home, and tell me in the comments. If you won $15 million, who is the first person you would trust with that impossible secret?